Morning. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, perfect. I see people coming in here, so I'm going to give it a couple minutes while we get more folks rolling in. Happy Monday, everybody. Um, this is our, yeah, it's a hangover from Super Bowl Sunday here. Um, it's an interesting, very defensive game yesterday, but happy to, I guess once we're past the Super Bowl, we're officially in tax season, probably, if we don't feel like we're in it already.
We haven't
Um,
started yet. Now's the time.
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm joined by Rebecca Lamas today, who's an accounting specialist in our QA lead, and we'll talk a little bit about um, the team that she's leading in terms of ensuring quality. And we'll get to this a little bit later in terms of how we test that for our systems. But she's been instrumental. She's an accountant as well, and been instrumental in kind of leading our efforts to ensure the quality of our data and the accuracy of our mappings and things like that. And we'll talk a little bit about that once we get into it here. But Rebecca, you want to say anything? Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning. First Juno webinar for me. So excited to be here with you guys. Yeah, I joined the team about 6 months ago and got the QA system up and running, and it's been really a blast ever since. And it's just excited to be here and chat through it all with you guys.
Yes, she is a glutton for punishment here. We have to, they're inventing a new way yeah, the new forms of QA that we need to have that no one's ever had to have before. And I've got a couple slides today, guys. Here, let me shrink this, move some things around here. And hold on, I'm not presenting correctly. Bear with me, it's Monday. All right. So I'm actually going to show a couple slides today. We'll jump in and out of the product in different ways, but what we want to do today is really focus on bringing data into your systems, and then some of the kind of data flows that we have in here. So we've talked about preparer, we've talked about reviewer, and we've talked about advisor. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of data flows. And so this is the stack that I had been running at my firm. We just recently switched to TaxStone, but we had been using Carbon before that. And so I wanted to start by just thinking about how this data comes in. And this is important for Juno because obviously if a client walks in and drops off their documents and you don't scan them, then much harder to automate down the line, right? When you get to Juno. So like that first thing on the far left with the client organizers could be like someone walking in the office or doing an appointment. I know some firms are still doing like the sit down appointment where you bring in your documents. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. I love the human touch of that piece, and I hope we'll actually enable a little bit more of that as we automate some of the other work. But that being said, it really matters kind of how your data comes in, how it gets structured. As an example, like if it's not well organized or if it's not digital, it's really difficult for Juno to have an impact on your overall efficiency. And then also your practice management software. If you guys, I feel like this has come a long way in the last few years. There's some good options there now. But for a long time, I had used like Practice CS or OTP or some different tools that were pretty antiquated. And the reason that matters in your workflows is making sure that everyone on your team knows what they're supposed to be doing, right? That's the most important piece for me. I also really like the messaging internally. Like we can email and then we can have messages internally on top of the email, basically, or in the same threads. And so there are some other benefits to it, but from a tax preparation perspective, it's about knowing what steps are supposed to happen and who is supposed to do those things, right? Primarily, in terms of how that impacts your tax prep. And then there's document storage. So there's also, right, for many folks, they may not be using their practice management for their document storage. So I have like Google Drive at my practice, which we use. There's 1,000 solutions here. But the reason I wanted to start there is there's things upstream of Juno that really matter in terms of how effective Juno is going to be able to be. So we're going to talk a little bit about a couple ways of bringing in data this morning. a few different ways actually, because it's really important. What happens before you get to Juno matters a great deal, and you know. This is about ensuring you have all the documents. I know, like, I'll give you the funny example. Everyone always, oh, sorry, the one everyone, well, I'm going just completely backwards here. The example everyone always gives here, which is, client turns in 80% of their documents, they think they're done, then they send me three more documents. And your ability to deal with those types of issues is really important for your, automating downstream. So let me give you an example to make that really obvious. If I start preparing a tax return and I'm missing three of the, 14 documents, and then I have to stop and I have to go back to it, 5 days later when the client uploads their last documents, I'm going to forget where I was in that return because I will have worked on maybe 10 different returns or more in between. And so I've lost some efficiency there and I've got to go back and remember where I was. Right. And then make sure that I actually finish all the other source documents. Were there other adjustments that need to be made? Okay, now I imported these new things. Now I've got to go check those, but some of those might be combined with some of the original document. Like if I have another 1099 INT, oh, okay, well, now I've got to go tie out interest again. And so I know you all know this, but I just want to kind of really start this of like, why are we talking about this? By really reinforcing that your processes matter a huge deal. If you want to benefit from automation, you've got to get your processes in order. And I think a lot of folks do, but I wanted to just make that obvious. It took us a few years as a practice to really get that nailed. Um, it's not a simple thing, but it will help you take advantage of Juno. We're surrounded by all these other softwares that you guys use, and they really do have an impact on how effectively you can use Juno. So I wanted to show you guys as we jump in here, and I'm going to pop out to my browser so I can show you what this looks like. Um, a couple ways of bringing in data. So one's going to start from your practice management software. If you're using TaxDome, I know a lot of folks here are because we've got a great partnership with them. Then you can actually push things in directly from TaxDome. So I'm in the client document section of TaxDome. I've got this send to tax software button up here. And this is a click-through demo, by the way, just so you guys can see it. The first time you do this, you would sign up. I think everybody here is an active customer, so you've probably already done this. You're going to authorize sharing that information with us. We have different terms and conditions in terms of, giving us access to the data. We need people to sign up for it. And then you can select the specific documents that you want to send over. Again, like this is why organization matters, knowing which year things belong to, things like that. We do have some double checks in Juno, but you can select the documents here. One comment, this is a great question. I think this was maybe in the last boot camp or maybe on a demo. They all blend together for me. But the at this point, you do have to print the organizer as well and move that over. So if you print the organizer and put it in this folder, that would work, or you could just drag and drop into Juno. But just be aware that's not automatically pushing over yet. We're still working on that and hoping that'll come here pretty soon. And then you hit send to Juno, basically, once you've selected these documents and you've got a little status tracker here. So a pretty simple flow, but I wanted to share that with you guys. And then I'm going to cover two other ones, right? So the next one is Smart Vault. If you've got Smart Vault, then you've got a button actually and let me show you where this button is. Right here, and you might not be able to see this super well. Okay, so this where it says connected, right, Smart Vault or Box, we have integrations here where you can pull things in. I will say that, it's really nice to have this automation. My firm did it without any automation last year because we were pulling things from Intuit Link, which doesn't have an API. And there's going to be a lot of people that are dragging and dropping for a lot of years because there are many types of either practice management software or document storage software where um, it's there's no API or there's not an API that we can access for one reason or another. And so drag and drop is not the end of the world. I still saw huge efficiency gains with drag and drop. But if you are using Smart Vault, this is what that is going to look like. And let me just show you one thing on here. When you click on that button, you're going to end up with this, which is your file structure. You can select the individual clients, and then the to the right populates, and then you can select the documents itself. Hit upload. Really nice to be able to bring that in automatically. The primary benefit, though, I will say here is that you are less likely to forget documents. That's certainly a risk that we want to manage. Um, Other than that, though, it is pretty straightforward. And just bear with me one second. I got to log back in. But the last thing I'm going to show you is just dragging and dropping. So um, wanted to give you all the examples here basically so that you guys could see it end to end on this one. And okay, so if I pop into the Daisy Duck return, you guys can see this is automatically populating again. You all should have this already populated. If I've uploaded some documents, it's going to start on that next screen. But if I haven't, I can either select files to upload here, and then I can go to documents and I can bring in the client that I want to bring in. So my firm is actually still doing this. I find like if you think about it, if you're downloading this anyways and moving it to your document management system, then dragging and dropping takes like literally 1 minute, right? I mean, I can upload all these, hit open, and I've got them all loaded here. So this is a very small part of the overall time you're spending on the process. But the bigger thing that I want to highlight, which has nothing to do with Juno, is just getting those processes really streamlined so that your staff can work effectively. So, anyways, I'll pause there, Rebecca. I don't know if you want to add anything. And so from Rebecca's end, like one of the things she's driving, and we'll talk about this in more detail, is we do this automated testing, semi-automated testing, and so she's doing this constantly. So in terms of like organizing docs, bringing them over, things like that, she's probably got more experience than anybody else, I would imagine, over the last few months. But any tips or tricks there, Rebecca, or anything to add?
Definitely, on tomorrow's boot camp, we're going to really focus on the tax software and kind of the tips and tricks associated to each tax software. And something we'll cover then is we have a really nice scanning feature, which David keeps referring to kind of. We have our checks within our system to ensure that we're not duplicating uploads of documents, really being able to allow our users and clients to create the ability to review everything that you've uploaded and then seeing what has already been pushed to your tax software. And so we'll talk about that more tomorrow from a scanning perspective, but it's a really, really nice feature that the team has built out. And it comes definitely from like an accountant's perspective and clearly someone who has run, a taxed company for quite a few years to really ensure that we are checking and you guys are able to easily visualize and view what documents have already been uploaded and pushed to your softwares. And then the other thing I would add here as well is we have quite a few integrations already from SmartVault, as Dave was referring to, in a couple other groups where we can help upload your documents and kind of streamline that process. And what I would add as well is we have a really great customer success and support team. So if there is a program that you guys are using that you want to request as a future feature, right? Like let's find out what our users and clients are working with the most. So we will be adding more and more integrations for various kind of ways that you guys are saving your files. So we always love that feedback. We always love hearing kind of what other products you would like us to connect and automate with if we're not doing yours yet already. But yeah, that's definitely a couple top ones that come to mind, but I definitely think you covered the vast majority of it, Dave.
Yeah, perfect. And then one other comment I'll make there is, when you're moving things from your client organizer, wherever you're collecting that information, I will say these things separately because sometimes people don't do their client organizers in their practice management system. So I'll try to describe each point kind of discreetly. But having a customized organizer is really important to minimize back and forth. I will tell people I think it's if you don't have one yet, what I mean there is it creates a custom checklist of the documents that they uploaded based on the prior year tax return, right? And there's quite a few softwares now that do that. And that is a really critical step. It just not has nothing to do with Juno. It has everything to do with, going back and forth with the client, right? Because if they miss a document, there's just such a high chance you start to work on the return and then have to do double work. Or at the very least, your staff is having to like go through and see which documents they submitted, which ones they didn't, and then send them an email of like, you're still missing these three things. And there's always going to be a little bit of that, but if you can at least use a tool that helps you do that, it's going to really reduce the back and forth. I wanted to show you too what Rebecca was talking about here. This is just one example, but it's noting a name mismatch. So you can see, and this is because it's because it's dummy data. But Cheryl last name doesn't match the Daisy Duck client that I'm using. So we have these little alerts here when you're in the validation stage. It is really important to look at those. Like we'll flag if it's the wrong tax year. We'll flag if there's a name mismatch. By the way, we don't reject it in this case. We're just flagging it for you. You could delete this form if you wanted to. If I'm like, you know what, this actually is not, it's in the wrong client file or it's the wrong year. So I'm going to go ahead and delete it. But we do let you override it just so that fundamentally the user's in control of this. Like sometimes I can have a child that has a W-2 that I'm putting on the return or something like that. So we don't want to reject it automatically. We also will tell you up here like which pages we're seeing the data on. So you can see like page 2, 4, and 6 here have data. And this is a drawer structure. So if this were like multiple forms, then it would give you like the different forms here in this one packet. But in this case, it's just a W-2. But my point here is like there are some instructions at the top of the validation screen that are pretty important. So do pay attention to these. Check the other example would be if we see duplicate data. So that's what Rebecca was talking about. And I don't know if I have that in this particular client. Let me just see actually if I've got, I'm going to click around randomly and see what I've got here. I might have duplicate data, but let me see if I do source. Yeah, I don't think I do in this particular one, but it pops up just like this message here, and it just says like we see duplicate data in another form. And so again, like we put the user in control, like there is a chance that they got two 1099 INTs with the same amount on them. So we want fundamentally for the user to be in control of overriding these things. But that being said, we do want to alert them at the top. So if you're having yourself or someone else on staff do this, just make sure that you're thoughtful about making sure they look at those warnings. And then also like there may be forms that we don't support, right? So this is a brokerage statement, and this is a little bit hard to see here. This is actually like a statement. It's not it's a supplement to the statement. It doesn't have like the sums on it. And so it's not a 1099 INT form. Now, I would say like I really encourage you to still upload this because I want to keep all the client's packet of information together. I want that all to be in the work paper, right, that we're creating. And then also the last thing is in reviewer, we're starting to review more and more unstructured data. So what I mean by that is like not just a 1099 or not just a an organizer or a W-2 or a K-1 or whatever it might be. We're starting to look through the less structured data and extract information from that. So an example would be, we'll go through the organizer, which is not an IRS form, and no matter what the form of the organizer, and we'll take off like charitable contributions, right? So we will do that already today. As we go through time, like we're going to continue to expand the list of things that we can pull off those unstructured documents. So, an example would be like in Reviewer, if you go to the gotcha checks, or excuse me, if you go to the organizer checks, you'll see that if someone says they had a child or they got married or they have an EV credit, it's going to flag that on the return. We're not putting the information into the return because we're not entirely sure we could do that really accurately. We just don't want to have any false positives there where we extract and say, oh, they got married, change their filing status. And then it's hard for the person preparing the return to understand what we've changed and know that there might be an issue with it. So instead of using it in Preparer right now, because of the confidence level we have, we use it instead in Reviewer. But that's another example of like, unstructured data that we're extracting. So we have a language model go look for certain types of language and then go look for that in the tax return. And as we go through time, like more and more of that's going to be built into Preparer. It won't be long before, we're able to handle at least like having a child getting married, I don't know, medical expenses for Schedule A, 1098 being split across different properties, things like that will be coming, this year for sure. And so we'll continue to expand the percentage of work we can do on a typical tax return beyond the core forms. But we're just being thoughtful about that because we want to make sure we do it with really high accuracy.
And
So yeah, go ahead, Rebecca.
something else I think that you briefly mentioned that's really good to cover here is, we accept 21 source document types right now. That's constantly, that's a big part of my role, right? Is we're constantly adding more source documents and getting them into a place where we can really successfully extract that data and push it to your tax software. But what's really nice, as kind of Dave briefly mentioned, is when generating your work papers, we really encourage you to still include every source document associated to your client, because we have developed the system to still pull out the documents that maybe we do not necessarily extract and push into the tax softwares, but we still create that full report for you in a way to really kind of review everything top to bottom from a client perspective. And it's a really, really nice feature that got updated in the last couple months to really make sure we're giving you that full package, even if we're not necessarily extracting and then pushing all the data. And then the other thing that I would add here as well is when you're even looking at the various client source documents, under specific fields, they'll say something along the line of this data is not exported to your tax software. And that's a really good call out for you, because that data will still be extracted, pushed into your work papers. Our reviewer at the end, when you finish your return, you bring it back to Juno, they're still comparing with that data to what was actually in your return, and kind of doing those gotcha checks, as Dave had said. So even if the data isn't necessarily extracted and pushed into the tax software quite yet, and it's for various reasons, right? Like every tax software works a little differently on when they populate client names and social security numbers or addresses or really complex niche data points, right? That we don't necessarily push to the software yet. It's still really, really beneficial that we're extracting this data, using it in reviewer for when we bring back the return, using it in the work paper. So everything's listed there. So it's nice. And it's something as well that we're consistently updating. We have a bunch of great documents online, and support articles that kind of go through exactly which source documents we accept, exactly which data we accept and extract and why. And it also includes, especially with like K1X, right? For example, a new partnership here, as we discussed last week, that's a really great example of like now we're able to, even though not necessarily export your data from K1Xs into the tax software, we're still extracting all that data and utilizing K1X, and pushing that into your work papers, pushing that into the review with your returns, pushing that into the K1X system. So, yeah, that's a really nice kind of new feature development in the last month or two. And it's continuing to grow, and obviously continuing to add more and more forms and data that not only do we extract but now export. So come extensions, a lot of this data that maybe doesn't export today to your tax software, our goal is to kind of have all of that moving by extension season.
Yeah, so quick. So this is just an example of a K1. Like we may tell you, yeah, we've got all the extracted data on the right here. And then what Rebecca's talking about is in the binder is the best place to see like what's left to do on a particular
Mhm.
document. And the longest ones are going to be the K1s, just because the amount of fields coming off a K1. And so again, with K1X, we can extract more information off that form. We do, for the most part, put in everything off of page one for both federal and state. What we're not yet doing are the footnotes, right? And but K1X, to give you guys an example, extracts something like 7,000 fields from a K1, so
Yeah.
7,000 possible values. And if we map federal and state page one, that's probably maybe a few hundred fields totally, right? Like in total, excuse me. So because you've got all the left columns and then you got the main boxes on page one. And so then you do the states and like, I don't know, maybe that's 400 or 500 fields, something like that. That being said, like it's a small fraction of the total fields, but in the footnotes of a K1, um, many of a lot of the information that's being provided in those footnotes, it requires like thought from the preparer, right? How do I deal with this information? This is a further breakdown of a specific number on page one, as an example. What do I do with it? And so our team is already working through basically how do we start to automate data entry from the footnotes. And we'll start with the most common, things in the footnotes. But it's going to take us some time to do that. And frankly, it's February 9th. We don't have a lot of complex K1s right now with footnotes. But in fact, I don't even know that I've seen one. But that being said, we will get more. And so we've got a little bit of time and we're going to start to work through those footnotes. And then, but my point is here, this binder is meant to communicate to you what we did and did not put in the tax software. And so this is your catch-all right here in the binder to understand what work is left to be done for that. And you'll even see in the next even the next few weeks, the next couple weeks, some updates to Binder to make that even easier to use and make it more obvious to you. Like we're going to have a little instruction thing at the top that just says like this is what this checklist means, just to make that simpler for you. Okay, so popping back in here, so I wanted to talk a little bit about mappings and accuracy. And so, like, let's take, I'm going to give you like the most basic example that I can. Just take one box off of a K1, right? Box 14 in this case. There's going to be a code and there's going to be a value. And we take both of those. And again, we do it at federal and state level. So there's actually would be another page with a code and a value if there's a specific state K1 or multiple state K1s, right? So we take all of those different codes and values and then we go push them over. And this would be a screenshot of ProConnect here on the right. So I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger. And what's funny is we know though the mapping of exactly where that goes in each tax software. And I just picked this one. This is totally random, but I picked a K1 on purpose because I don't know what your data entry looks like in your tax software, but for ProConnect on box 14, there's something like, four different fields that every single code is a different field, actually. It's not like the code itself is a piece of data entry. That actually just means it maps to a different field. And you guys don't have to worry about that necessarily, but I use it as an example of the complexity of what like Rebecca's team is handling, right? So we have to know the routing of all of this information off of all the core forms. And we have something like between 3 and 4,000 fields mapped. And then we do it across 5 tax softwares. So you can imagine like that's something like 15 to 20,000 mappings that we're managing at all times. And this is funny. I do have a typo on form, 2 R's on that one. That's going to drive me completely crazy as an accountant. My apologies for that. But we pull the code, we pull the amount, we pull the box number that it's coming from, and then we know where to go put that in each piece of tax software. And then the one thing I want to say out loud here that Rebecca was kind of alluding to a minute ago was sometimes like there's not always a way to enter that in the tax software, right? If I have like a complex code, even like ProConnect, I know for K1s, like there's certain code amounts that like there's no box for it. And so that's where we use the checklist, right? Is we're like, hey, we don't see a place to put this information. There are much simpler things like on a 1099 INT, I typically can't put the address in of the payer, which is totally fine. It's not going to impact the tax return. But that being said, we do call out that hey, we don't have anywhere to put address on this one, so we didn't put it in for you. And that's just a catch again. Like if somebody, I don't know, if someone, this is an unlikely scenario, but I'm just going to go with it anyways. If someone were like, no, the address has to be on a 1099 INT, I'm going to find a way to figure out how to put that in the tax software. We're communicating with them what we are and are not pushing into their software. Yeah, the last thing there is we will tell you based on your tax software. So if a field doesn't exist, because what you see across the different types of software that we support is that you know, some of them have simpler K1 data entry screens, but they don't support as many different types of data going in on the K1 screen. And so we will actually, the tax binder is tax specific, tax software specific. So it will tell you, like in Drake, I did not put this in here. And that's because our binder actually knows what software you're using, and all the actual alerts are going to be specific to your tax software. So we're testing this all the time, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but that's like fundamentally why what we're doing is pretty darn complex. And then to layer on top of this, there are times where there are logical exceptions. I've used the example in the past of like New York and New Jersey state wages, where we need to make adjustments to this to make sure it's reported correctly. And we on that particular example, this last week, I give it as an example for all of you, so you can continue to provide us really good feedback. We were doing it correctly in ProConnect and Lacert. There's a different way to do it in Drake. And so we had someone come in and they emailed support at Juno.tax and kind of were like, hey, this isn't working the way I want it to. Can you make this adjustment? The quick thing for you guys, if you don't remember, is you're grossing up your state wages basically, and there are times where you add back healthcare. But so you're like New York or New Jersey, whatever your resident state is. If you have out of state earnings, the state for New York, for example, needs to be the sum of all state wages effectively. And so I give that as an example of just like we will over time build in more of those logical kind of exceptional flows, right, into our software so that you can make a quick decision, or in that case, you don't even have to make a decision. We just know the underlying rules and we'll push it into your tax software automatically. And when we make those adjustments, we'll also make notes of those adjustments in the binder. So you've got a full like roadmap of what happened. It's meant to also be an audit trail as well as an instruction book for your team. Okay, but I might pause there just to see if there's any questions. I don't, Rebecca, if you've had an eye on chat, if there's anything we want to do before we go into the next topic.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And before we go through the chat, one other thing I would add here as well is like the quality assurance team that I run, we are all accountants. And I think that's a really key item for our team that every developer and the tax softwares that they're using, they're paired with an accountant to work with them directly to basically push out these updates on a daily basis. So every morning, all of our developers run a very complex return of 80 source documents covering every source document we have every single morning through the system. So constantly checking and validating that, as we know, like tax softwares are being updated on a daily basis, right? So we're always confirming and checking first thing in the morning that our system is continuing to work as anticipated. And then after that, we have our accountants run, I would say, multiple tests every week of very complex and kind of edge case clients and, edge case, I would say, returns and pushing them through the system to really make sure that all of our softwares are able to handle kind of these unusual, but occasionally they pop up type of client data and client returns. And so it's a really kind of nice balance between the accountants and the developer team to really make sure we're doing these daily audits and running new complex situations through our system. And Dave even alluded to this, like an example of something that's getting pushed out this week is 1098 mortgage mappings, right? Whether or not your loan is larger than $750,000, what year the loan was taken out, et cetera, varies on where those mappings go per software and the different source documents and documents associated and papers associated to the client, varies quite a bit between types of mortgages. And so that's something that's getting pushed out this week, right? It's essentially 6 different scenarios for each software, but that's kind of the type of edge cases that we're constantly pushing for, working for, to really make sure that our system is up to date and running really, really cleanly, and as perfectly as we can get it from a accountant's perspective. And it's definitely a very kind of unique role that we haven't necessarily seen in other types of accounting companies, this like QA type experience that is so, so necessary. And then I guess from the chat as well, kind of hopping in here, I have quite a few good questions, especially between kind of the K1s and the binders. So a few that I will kind of quickly answer here is I saw Carly. Will the unused pages be separated from the K1 when the binder is produced? So kind of what Dave had said is the binders that we produce will highlight. So they put all of your documentation and data in the traditional order of a binder, but then we highlight essentially which documents we are part of the binder but aren't necessarily being exported from a data perspective into your tax software, so you know which ones you need to also push out. So that's a really kind of nice call out that we're doing on the binder. uh,
Well, and one quick comment there that we do keep all the pages just because I don't
mhm,
want our system to be deleting pages there, Carly. So which you could obviously there are things we could do to streamline, like imagine there's blank pages or something like that. At this point, we actually leave all the pages in
mhm.
just to be like really conservative in that way. So even if there's like unused, I don't, you'd have to clarify maybe a little bit what you mean by unused pages, but on a K1, we're going to take all the pages on that K1 is the quick answer. But we do also like surface all the information from the footnotes into the checklist at the
Mhm.
top. So like the checklist becomes, to be honest, as we're extracting data and then we're validating it in the validation screen, and we use different types of AI to extract that data. We're seeing really high accuracy on those source documents, and so what I think the takeaway is here logically is over time, as you get to trust the system more as you go through this tax season, you're less and less going back to the original source documents. So the first person who validates on the validation screen is probably going to look side by side and evaluate the different fields. I have my admins do that. They look at every field. Then my preparers go in and they look at the fields again. They go through the actual binder and they make sure everything got entered correctly. And
Mhm.
then remember that reviewer is checking it as well on the back end with a different set of logic. So by the time I get to it as a reviewer, and I don't want to tell people how to review tax returns, so I want to be very thoughtful that this is just Dave saying how Dave does it, not telling you how to do it. I don't go back to the original source document unless there's something unusual happening on that source document. So I will go to K1s, especially if there's material income coming off that K1, or I'll go to a brokerage statement if there's something with no basis. So I'm going to like exceptional source docs. I'm not going back to every source doc. So the binder itself is going to be used in a different way, but it's a good question, and I could bore you guys to tears with how much I've thought about that binder. But we're going to continue to kind of evolve on the binder there. And on that note, Sheila had a question about you're going to see this actually this week. I think this rolls out. Um, you are going to be able to reorder. You can already delete things from the binder.
Yep.
You're going to be able to reorder things as well if you'd like to do that. I think that's coming out literally on Tuesday of this week. And that might get
Yep.
moved around a little bit. So give us a little bit of pause there, but sometime this week that'll be coming out.
Mhm.
But great question there. You're going to be, and more over time, guys, you're going to be able to like do more and more with that binder in a way that you see fit. We see that as an evolving document. And I do want to say one quick thing for you guys. This is so nerdy, but I find it really fascinating. Um, the way that we have done work papers in the past is going to change as you start to use automation. So to me,
Mhm.
there's already like duplicative information in that binder. And like it used to be that we literally would like create a binder and I remember hole punching source documents, right? And like creating a binder and then like marking up the binder. And so today, even though we do this on a computer now, for most of us, we still like call it a binder and we still are using a lot of the best practices that we had when it was like on paper, and it was in an actual binder. And I find that to be really hilarious. But it's a testament to how much accountants love their processes. But as we automate more of this, one thing I just want to say out loud is a kind of a teaser for you guys on where this goes is at the very least, AI is going to be able to do a lot of that like busy work on the binder. And there's a lot that we have in mind for how we deal with this binder, but more and more of it's going to come into our application. And so what I mean by that is like, I don't love flipping over to a PDF and having to go and annotate the PDF. Or at least when I do that, I want every other piece of work to be done if possible, like the ordering of those documents or any exceptions on the documents. I want those to be flagged as part of the work paper with AI because AI can go do like thousands of hours of work all simultaneously with hundreds of agents, right? Versus like a human having to go through and manually annotate things. It's just really time consuming. So the more we can automate that, the better. Um, we are going to be pushing on that really hard over the next kind of year or two. So love your feedback on Binder. The other thing I'll comment on is I always ask for feedback when we get to Binder just because I have noticed that every firm does this a little bit
Mhm.
differently. We're not as like consistent as you might think in terms of how we deal with work papers, just as an example. Yeah, and Andrea, by the way, I see your note about the W-2s. That's great. It's funny, we had solved it for ProConnect and Lacert. It's just such a good example with New York and New Jersey wages of like why we ask you guys constantly for feedback because we will make the product better. We'll go track it down. We had a team go look at like Drake and how it should be reported in Drake. And I won't bore you guys with with exactly why this one is complex to deal with, but it's an overriding of certain fields on the W-2. And we just need to be really careful that when we do that, we're doing it accurately in every scenario. I don't want to cause mistakes on people's returns. So that's something that definitely is top of mind for us and the team. But we have a team of accountants, to Rebecca's point. Like they're all accountants, almost all of whom have worked in tax firms, who are reviewing that type of feedback when you give it to us. And just FYI, like there are times where we get that type of feedback and like we're actually doing it correctly, or we're doing it in a way that actually results in a correct outcome on the return as well. So we'll go back and forth with you sometimes. Like there are also certain tax software, like you could put something in two different fields and you could get the same outcome, shockingly. And so people will be like, you need to do it this way. You're doing it the wrong way. And we're like, no, actually, it's like the exact same outcome. And that does happen from time to time. We just had that this last week in ProConnect on a 1099 issue that we were working on. Anyways, okay, great questions. And we have come a long way, Andrea, no question about that. But guys, we're just scratching the surface like this. Give us another year and you're going to be, I don't think our binders are going to look the way they do today. I think they're gonna evolve a lot. And so the more feedback you guys give us, the better this will become. I still think we're going to need an audit trail. I still think we're going to need notes on a tax return. I just think you're going to see AI making more and more of the adjustments. So, like, this is not actually probably going to happen, I don't think, unless my dreams all come true. But let's say, like, they sold their primary home and they gave us a document, like a sale document. And the binder, like we've already gone and researched that home. We saw the sale date, right? We went and found the original purchase price before that, and then we go and see did they report any improvements on the home, and then we go see if they use it as a rental property, if there was any depreciation associated with the home. And I'm just thinking out loud here. And then we give you a little summary at the bottom of the data that's been extracted on that home sale and where it came from, right? Like at some point that is going to be feasible and it's going to be in Binder, something like that. And so, Binder is really critical for us in terms of the communication of how our system works, but it's going to be evolving over time. It's going to be pulling more and more of that unstructured data and doing a lot of the work for you, but then communicating what the decisions that it made. So for feedback, yeah, definitely, Will, great question. I prefer support. Well, okay, let me give you two answers on that one. By the way, if you put it in the community, we're just going to tell you where it needs to go anyway, so don't worry about that. We'll figure it out. But that being said, the for product feedback, there's either product feedback at Juno.tax, or you can go to the community. That's great, unless you think it's like a mapping issue, which we consider to be a support issue. So let me just say out loud there. If for some reason you feel like something is going to the wrong place of your tax software, we consider that to be a bug. And so we will evaluate that with more urgency. So if you have like an idea for product, go put it in the community or hit product feedback at Juno.tax. That's great. Like we're always keeping a tab of, we actually have a Notion list of like, here's functionality that's coming in the future. And so we'll evaluate it and we'll prioritize it based on our accounting team and how material we think that'll be for our users. And then if it's a mapping issue, I want to know about it right away. And I want to have someone on Rebecca's team look at it like that day. Because I don't want to cause errors on a return, right? That's completely different in terms of the urgency. So we're constantly monitoring support. They're typically responding within 15 minutes, and then they'll actually go and research like, okay, this person's saying that when I put the 1099 miscellaneous information in this field in ProConnect or Lacert, that it's not mapping to this form. What's going on here? They'll run through a real return. So that's fundamentally, Will, I think, a more complex answer than you wanted. But the quick answer is for support, if it's a mapping issue or something's wrong, or you're seeing any sort of bug in the product, just email support at Juno.tax. You'll get the fastest feedback there. Okay, and then credits. So on credits, the a credit is used when you export a client for the first time. Is there's like one spot in our platform where a credit is considered used, and it's when you export a return. You can export a client like as many times as your heart desires, and it's not going to charge you additional credits for that client. It's just each discrete client, basically, that has been exported counts as a credit. fundamentally. So, and then an advisor and reviewer, you actually can run those right now. We don't like limit the number of returns you run there. So you're welcome to run things in there as you see fit. So I put my business returns in advisor and I have it review business returns for me. I've mentioned that in the last call. It doesn't like charge you for an extra return when you do that. We want the pricing to be very simple. There's just one credit, per return. Um, if you delete it and re-upload it, so if you rerun a return, so I just want to make sure I answer this question fully. Yeah, if you delete a client, that's a good question. I actually don't know if you delete the client, if you go back in, if it would then charge you for for the client again. I don't think it would, but I'll check on that. Um, the one comment I'll make is like typically I'd want you to delete the files in the client and re-upload those files as opposed to deleting the client themselves. But I will check on that and get back to you guys on that. Maria, I can get back to you on that. Have the team there. And then, all right, I'm just going through a couple last questions here. Um, don't know where to go back and look if resolution or something I'm supposed to be doing. The duplication of data in the Drake file, like the 1099 or W-2. Okay, so Sheila, I just want to make sure that I understand this. If there's resolution that needs to happen. Okay, so Sheila, if we see if we can't enter something in your tax software, we put it on the checklist. And that includes like address. Now, for address, if it's a 1099, to be honest, like the address is not going to change the tax return. I can't even think of a scenario where the address would be required on a 1099, but there are times where we can put that in. And if we can, we do put the data in there just because, our default should be trying to find a place to put all of the data from these source documents. But if we can't, for some reason, we put it on the checklist. And then it's kind of like your discretion to figure out how to use that information. So when I look at the checklist in Binder, I think to myself, like, is there something I need to do with this information? The system is kind of intentionally, it's not trying to be smarter than it should be, if that makes sense. Like we want to make it intentionally like very transparent, which means like in certain ways it's a little bit dumb, meaning like I don't want it to delete information and just assume that I don't need to know that it didn't put that information in my tax software. I hope that makes sense for everyone. So we default to like just tell me everything. You know what I mean? And that is so anyways, that will be how the system kind of works by default. But one comment there, Sheila, that I want to make that we're working on actually over the next few weeks is we want to start to tell people not just like what didn't get put in there, but basically how like either instructions on what to do with that information, or the like tax form that it would be relevant to. So we can put some instructions in there, and that's something we're actually working on right now that I think you'll start to see in the next few weeks, like specific instructions based on form, based on the information that wasn't entered. I want that checklist to be an instruction manual for a brand new tax preparer that doesn't even, maybe doesn't even know how to do a tax return. And I just say that because I want it to be that obvious what you're supposed to do with that information. And we are working on that really hard right now. And then Sarah, on that, if you add to preparer, yeah, that's a good question. I think, Sarah, we were just talking about this as a team. If you upload documents in preparer, I believe the point at which it charges you is actually when you export it. So it should be neither here nor there. But the reason we don't charge in preparer, well, I will say this: we don't charge you when you sync to your tax software because it creates a whole bunch of clients, and you might have clients in your tax software that aren't active clients of yours. And so we want to default and make sure we're not overcharging people. But either way, guys, I will tell you, we are not trying to overcharge you. If you have an issue with this, just hit support. Like it's totally fine if you get charged for extra credits. Our point here is not to squeeze every dollar out of you guys. Like that's why our pricing is really simple. Um, and then Jackie, you get like 10 free. So you're not getting charged for test. Like if you're in trial and you're uploading those returns, um, you're not getting charged for that during trial. You get extra ones put on there. So, but guys, if you have any issues, if like extra credits got charged and you don't think they should have, just email support. Not a big deal. Like we're truly trying to work with you guys for many years. I'm not concerned about charging you 5 extra credits or something. I promise you this. We'll be good about it. So yeah. And then Lindsay, I love all the questions, by the way, guys. I've been on this slide for like 12 minutes without even talking about it. Okay, so clarify the questions on the connection between Juno and Taxdome, account name and contact name. Yeah, so we have it's not in terms of Taxdome, we have not had we've had like one little bug this last week where there like some of the files coming across failed, and there's not an alert yet in Taxdome for that. So we're talking with their team about like getting an alert added. That was one person, and we did something like I don't know, I think we did over 20,000 source documents last week. So like again, this is very exceptional. But if you ever see that type of issue, please submit it to us. If oh, in Taxdome, this is a good question. Okay, for husband and wife, one comment there is, we're doing a mapping of the client information from TaxDome into your tax software, and like all of the time, basically, there are differences in those names. It can be first name, last name, or last name, first name. It can be, a million different things. The primary taxpayer can be different things like that. There are a couple things to note there. Generally speaking, we have a name resolution function. So if we can't figure out the match, we're going to tell you which clients we think it might be, and then you can select the client. So there is a way of resolving that. We do not need to have both people on there. It When you upload a husband and a wife. So it depends on what you mean by upload there, Andrea. So if you want to clarify that, I'm happy to answer specifically. But quickly, the way our system works is it maps to your tax software and it takes the primary taxpayer for your tax software. If for some reason you have a different primary, then it won't match to an active client and it asks you which client you should be mapping to. So that should resolve issues there. If you guys see other issues as you're mapping from TaxDome, let us know for sure. But we have like this resolution step in case we can't find an accurate match. Um, and just sent to Juno from TaxDome for a husband and wife. Well, if you export them separately, Andrea, then we would read that as two clients, right? Like typically for each return, we have a concept of like basically that one return pushing into one return. So hopefully, I have never done that where I've like created separate portals for a husband and wife and then try to merge it into one. But that might be a case where you have to download like either one or the other, basically, right? And then manually upload those. Gino separated them. Okay, Andrea, if you would send me, I would submit that to support. Let's have a look at what happened there. That's a great question. Um, okay, and then I'm gonna jump back in real quick. I know we got just a few minutes left, so let me talk through a couple extra things, and then we'll go back to Q&A here at the end. But I appreciate all the questions. Okay, I'm going to cover just a couple things. I'll make this very quick. You can have incredible impact on your margins as a firm. Um, there are different things you need to do to enable yourself to take advantage of the automation. One would be value-based pricing, right? Fixed pricing. I literally put that in my engagement letter. No one asked any questions about it, and that was like 3 years ago now. And it's really opened up our firm's ability to go and take advantage of the automation that we're seeing. And again, like the goal there is to get from reactive to proactive. I'm looking left to right, like this is before and after using automation. In terms of growth, adding more clients is the old way of like you've got to go do more work, and your capacity is limited by how many people you have. Your growth strategy as you go forward with Juno and other automation tools can be really like enhancing capabilities, right? And thinking about like what services you could even add to it, and therefore you can scale on top of the staff that you have. And your capacity is limited not by like the number of hours that you have, but basically by like the value of the work that you're doing or intelligence. And these are real numbers. Like my profit margins as a firm, I think I was close to maybe 23 or something like that. This isn't just about my firm. This is just generalizing for firms before and after, but we increased our margins over 50%. So net margins at the end of the year over 50%. We were doing about 40% more revenue per employee. And like the time on low value work, this is a ballpark based on feedback we've received. But think about the reduction in like just data entry and things like that. It's really massive across the staff. There's a couple things I wanted to comment on, and I'll keep this short just because we're limited on time. That your roles change, right? So for my admins, they can collect data, they can go back and forth with folks. They can validate that data because it's super obvious what they're supposed to be validating. Like, what does box one say? And the mappings into the tax software are done by Rebecca's team, right? So I don't have to worry about them putting it in the wrong field, which can be one of the other things that you have to train your staff on. They don't have to create the work papers. They don't have to rename all the source documents. They don't have to reorder the source documents, all the things that they used to do. And then on billing, this is not related to Juno specifically, but what I told my team to do is like, hey, do it an increase. Well, in the engagement letter, we say our prices are going up, whatever percent. So you do the increase of 5% on the return. We still track hours. I wanted to do that to track productivity, but also it's a great way of catching scope changes. And so what my admins do when they bill is they make sure that we're billing 5% over last year. Okay, great. And then they look for any changes in scope, and there's billing notes from the preparer or the reviewer. And then if there are not billing notes, the number of hours times our billing rate is a catch to make sure that we didn't miss any changes in scope because we really shouldn't be writing downtime, especially with Juno, pretty much ever. So if that happens, then we have like it gets surfaced to me for review so I can see what happened with the return. Obviously there's still times where you just choose to like eat some time on something if somebody was doing it for the first time. But my point here is your admin roles change a little bit. If you are using an admin, they can do a lot more work. They can help prepare the return, actually, right? And I say that like, cautiously because what they're really doing is just working, doing what Juno's telling them to do, and then the mappings are already done. But that means that the preparer starts further down the road. And then I'm going to go over to one more on preparer, and then I'll go back to Q&A here for the few minutes that we got left. The Okay, so my preparers are starting with all the data entry done, right? They can focus on the complex issues. I had one of my preparers say this last year, like I just felt like clear-minded about this because I didn't have to like worry about all the data entry stuff. So I could actually think strategically about a return for the first time. And I thought that was really interesting feedback. So they're focused on complex issues like the solar credit, or they sold their primary home, they have a 1031 exchange, something like that. They can spend more time on review, and review is aided by our reviewer module. And so like they're working with reviewer to do a more thorough review. And then advisor can help as well. So with delivery letters or answering questions, and I gave the example, like someone emailed me this question about selling a home and what their break even was and how much they were going to owe in taxes. And I just copied and pasted it into advisor and ran that. And it took just a few minutes of what would have been a couple hours. And during tax season, like that, those 2 hours would have been like 6 to 8 p.m. probably, right? For me this time of year. So it makes a really big difference to be able to use advisor to answer some of those questions quickly that come in during tax season that you can't put off. So just be thoughtful about the role changes on your team in order to take advantage of the automation that's coming, that is here basically with Juno, but coming, for the industry. The roles actually need to change on your team, and so be thoughtful about that in terms of how you're spending your time and how you're training your team. The other quick thing I always say is like your admins are probably going to be more compliant than your preparers, who are more compliant than your reviewers. And I know a lot of the people on this call are reviewers, myself included. So I just say this with a lot of empathy towards what we're doing. It's just that we've been doing this for a long time, right? So changing it is actually harder for us for whatever reason. So like in order to get compliance, sometimes you want to go to the most junior person on staff and say, for me, it's my admin. She's checking every day to see what's been uploaded. I'm like, when you check, download whatever is ready to go, put it in Juno right then. And so that way, like when the preparer gets in, it's already done and the data entry is done, it's validated, and the work paper is created. And then that way they're starting, something like 80, 90% of the way down the road on the tax return. But my point there is also that the admin, I knew that my admins were going to be really compliant with that. And if it was already in Juno, then my preparers are more likely to be compliant. So, you want to go to the most junior person to make sure that you're driving compliance there so that we're already down the path on Juno. Okay, I think that was what I wanted to cover. Let me go back to Q&A here. And thank you guys for the patience. Sorry to be jumping around on this one. There's so many good questions. Let me pull this up here, guys. All right, so and I'll stop this so I can actually look at this thing larger.
Yeah,
Couple
Sheila,
minutes.
on your last one with the
Yep.
support at juno.com. Yep, 100% best way to get a quick response. They are responding within 20 minutes. And then using the community, Modern Tax Pros for just larger conversations about what Juno's doing from an updated perspective, community feedback, etc. But yeah, the quickest way to get support is definitely just shoot them an email and they'll get right back to you.
And with feature requests, we are checking the modern tax pros like daily. Truly, I mean,
Yeah.
our whole team will be like, "Oh, did you see what this person dropped in?" Love those ideas, guys. It's so helpful. And as you get into tax season, you're going to have a lot of them. Don't be hesitant to throw them out there. Like we truly do read it. I mean, you guys will see me responding all the time. We are watching it carefully. I can't wait to see what ideas people come up with. So don't hesitate to put things out there, even if it's like something random, like this. I find this to be confusing, really helpful for us actually, because if you're confused, so are probably 10 other people, and they just aren't going to take the time to put it out there. So I'm always like, guys, that we have to take this stuff really seriously, because for every comment out there, there are 10 more that did not comment on this. So we read through every single one of those. There are times where like there was a comment last week that was a good one actually about like matching on a schedule C. There are times where we don't want to make the product too complex. And so we may choose not to do something if we don't think we could do it in an automated way. And what I mean by that is like, I don't want you to have to match every single thing on a return. It'd be really time consuming to do that, and it would take away from your time savings. So so there are ideas out there that will be like, hey, this is like hard. Like we might not do this right now, but we want all the ideas to come out either way. There's no bad ideas there. We will to be requested. You can make a custom checklist in Advisor. Nika, the you just drop it in Advisor. You say, hey, can you make a custom checklist? And that's something that we get asked a lot. We will figure out a way to surface that in the document. Remember, in Reviewer, we also go through a custom checklist. So we can do that. You can ask Advisor for a list of documents you need to collect from the client, and it will do that for you. That's one of our templates that we use. Good questions, though. I
And in
love it.
Reviewer as well, you can upload previous year's returns. So it can also give you feedback on items you might be missing or items that maybe you hadn't considered yet. So between advisor and reviewers, previous returns, that's a really nice way to review previous years and the information associated.
Perfect. And I know we're out of time here. We're at 9. We have one last session tomorrow. We're going to focus
Mhm.
on exports. And this one's a really important one because exporting, like just like what we talked about today, is nuanced, right? And so we'll show you guys how that looks in different types of tax software, as well as like some of the, some of the decision making that kind of happens along the way there, some of the automations that we have. And it's really critical for understanding how the system works. So we'll go through that tomorrow. And yeah, thank you all so much for the engagement. One last boot camp, and then you're going to be ready to rock. But you guys know more than anybody about Juno now. It's great that we've been able to cover so much material, and I really appreciate people sticking around for it. If you have any other questions, feel free to hit up support, or you can go to Modern Tax Pros as well, guys. But thank you all, and happy Monday. Good luck this week, and we'll see you hopefully tomorrow to talk a little bit more about exports.
Thank you guys.
Thanks,
Looking
guys.
forward to chatting more.